Hello, Jenny. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. I'm really excited to chat with you.
Thanks for having me today.
Yay. So, we're going to dive into your amazing business and all the cool things that you have done with your business. But I would love for you just to introduce yourself and just tell everyone who you are and just a little bit about your business.
Yes, my name is Jenny Tse, and I'm the owner and founder of Sipping Streams Tea Company in Fairbanks, Alaska. We are not just a tea house where people can come in and get food and drinks, but we're also a store and we're a manufacturer. So we also sell online and we actually specialize in tea education. So we have a tea education component part of our business, a separate branch, which helps people become certified tea specialists around the world.
Interesting. And we were just chatting before we started recording. And I know for a lot of my listeners, you guys know my love for Alaska because I went twice last year and I'm going again in August to hang out with bears. But me and my husband and my son went to Fairbanks in June, and we think that my husband may have tried Jenny's tea while we were there. So but that was kind of fun and interesting. The universe, I guess, wanted this connection to happen. But yeah, I'm excited to talk about your business. And I know you've built a very, very successful business, seven figure, or I believe multi seven figure business. I would love to talk about how that started, like this history of your business, because I know right now your business is what it is, but it maybe wasn't always like that. And I feel like a lot of people hear about businesses like yours and they're like, oh, I want to have a business like that. But like they forget that your business was not an overnight success. I'm just making assumptions here. Maybe your business
Oh,
was.
yeah,
I
no,
don't
no,
know. We're going to hear
no.
about it. But like we hear about like like the Glossiers and all these companies that do so well, but it doesn't just happen overnight. It takes time, and it takes investing in programs and coaches and mentors and making mistakes and wasting money and learning. So I really, really love to kind of go back to the beginning. So you have this business, you have, your tea shop, you do a lot in manufacturing, you're an educator, you're doing a lot of different things. Take us back to the beginning. Like, when did you start this business? What did the early days look like for you? And we can kind of just go from there.
Yeah, so it's very interesting that you say that because most people assume like, oh my goodness, they're so successful. It's like they came out of nowhere. But even
Mhm.
Damon John from Shark Tank from Fubu, he said it's 15 years in the making. And I
Yep.
just hit 16-year anniversary last month.
Wow.
So all the things I do now were not what I started off with, nor did
Hmm.
I intend for them to be like that. So I own a tea company and we've won 11 international awards for our teas. So in the very beginning, I started winning international awards, which was just crazy to me because I actually grew up as a coffee drinker. Like I like black coffee, like just straight up black coffee. And
Hmm.
people think I don't drink coffee, but I've been drinking coffee since I was four, like four and a half. I just,
Four?
yeah, I like the taste of coffee, just straight, nothing in it. And people are just like, black coffee? And I'm like, yeah, just straight black coffee. And
Oh my
so,
God.
um, and, and my grandmother, so I was also born in Hong Kong. And when my grandmother would come and visit us in Alaska, she'd bring C's candy and it was the coffee candy. And I remember as a kid, like picking the lock, like
Hmm.
somehow I learned how to pick the lock in the cabinet to steal the candy out. But I
Oh my
really like
God.
coffee, like the flavor of coffee. So I didn't start drinking coffee until my last year of college. And I was a double major in athletic training. So that's sports medicine, for those of you who don't know what athletic training is, and physical education K through 12. So I was going to become a certified T, like not a T specialist, sorry, a certified teacher for
Hmm.
K through 12 in PE specifically, but I had a very extensive math and science, physics background with my sports medicine. And when I came back to Fairbanks, I was drinking tea because my last year of college, my drink cost 5.28 every day at the coffee shop. And I was like, okay, I need to cut back on, and back then that was like a whole meal you could buy, like eating out at 5.28, before this crazy inflation. So I'm like, okay, I got to pay my student loans back. What's the cheapest thing on the menu? Oh, tea. Okay, I'll just drink tea. And I'm Chinese, right? So my friends in Idaho, I went to Boise State University, and they're like, "Oh, do you drink tea because you're a trainer? Oh, I heard it's healthy for you. Oh, I heard it cures cancer. Are you drinking tea because you're Chinese?" And yeah, it kind of sounds racist, but these are my close friends. So I'm like, yeah, whatever. I don't know. I'm like, you've known me for 5 years. Like, have I ever drank tea in the last 5 years you've known me? Like,
Yeah.
I literally just started drinking tea, and they thought it was just this thing. They're like, "Oh, that's so fascinating. What what are all these like health benefits of tea?" And I'm like, "I don't know. It's the cheapest thing on the menu. I don't care about the health benefits. I care about having to pay my student loans back." So, being a curious educator, right? Because I'm going into education, we have this kind of personality trait where we want to know everything so we can teach people or tell people or explain to people. So while I was in the library and I'd be looking up different taping and wrapping techniques, electrode techniques, stimulation, or whatever for rehab, I would actually come across some case study research on tea. So I'd read the whole thing, the article. I'm like, how fascinating. I don't know anything about tea. Now I can tell somebody, what I learned about this specific case study on, 40-year-old men in Norway, because it was specifically on that. I don't know what else there is about tea, but this is actual hard, research science on this. So that's just kind of where it started. And when I went into physical therapy, coming back to Alaska, I was the head athletic trainer for a high school. So I handled all the athletes and their injuries and their nutrition plans and everything like that. In the clinic, when I'd work there after or before hours of the high school, people would see me drinking tea. And we had a lot of military patients because we're very close to the army post. So I had people from all over the world who would be my patients because they're mostly military. And they'd be like, "Oh, you drink tea too? I remember drinking tea when I was a kid." Like, they didn't actually ask me if I drank tea. They just assumed because I'm drinking a Lipton tea bag. And they would tell me their stories about tea, about their experiences with their aunts, with their grandmother, that it made them feel better or whatever it is. And I was like, how fascinating. Because I'm not a tea drinker. I wasn't raised a tea drinker. So they would just assume I identified with them. But I just let them, tell me all about themselves. And I realized the more I drank tea or just had a cup of tea walking around drinking it, more people would tell me about their own personal stories of their background. I'm like, this is so fascinating. People just open up because I literally am now identified as a tea drinker. And so I started reflecting on my own life. I'm like, well, how is tea Chinese? I know that sounds like so silly, but I did not grow up as a tea drinker in Alaska. And a lot of Alaskans drink coffee. So I'm like, well, what does it mean to be Chinese? And what does it mean for people to think that tea is Chinese or Asian or Indian, right? Or Russian, all these Asian countries, Turkey or whatever. I'm like, what does that even mean? And so I started reflecting on my upbringing and my own cultural identity. I'm like, am I really Chinese? Like, what does it mean to be Chinese? Is it okay that I didn't grow up as a tea drinker? So I started reflecting and going through this essentially a cultural identity crisis with myself because I think of myself as Alaskan. And even people like, because the way that I dress, they, some people think I'm Native Alaskan. Totally fine. We both got black hair, I'm sure, kind of similar build, but I'm not, so it's fine. And but that's what, like, when you're an Alaskan, you grow up being like Alaskan, quote unquote. You're just whatever, which is totally fine. But meeting people who identify, like putting people into certain categories, it just made me challenge myself and who I was. And through that journey of discovering my parents' past, because they had a very, very hard upbringing. I think my mom only went to third grade. My dad left home when he was 13 years old to be a merchant marine chef, like all over the world. They had like, my mom said she had her first pair of shoes when she was 14 years old because she worked in a factory and she had to have shoes. And so they never told us about their past because it was so hard. Like my mom,
Mhm.
I remember her talking to somebody and saying how she used to steal vegetables from the next door neighbor because they didn't have enough food.
Aw.
And so, and this is in Hong Kong. Like I'm from Hong Kong, which you think of like New York City, Paris, but way
Mhm.
back then in the 50s, the 60s is totally different than what you see it is today. And
Mhm.
so we came to America for opportunity, right? Like most immigrants' families. So I went through this personal journey, and tea was this way for me to identify myself because I was becoming more and more of a tea drinker. My dad doesn't really drink tea, but my grandfather did, and so did my grandma. My mom just drinks hot water, but she loves plants and growing plants. And specializing in Chinese vegetables is what she sold at the farmer's market when I was a kid as a side hustle. Both of my parents are retired chefs. And
Mhm.
and so it's like, well, what does tea mean to us? And so because I was becoming more and more involved with like the education of tea and understanding tea and the culinary um, side of tea also and tasting in the history, I was like, wow, this is so fascinating. I wish they taught this in high school because I was so bored out of my mind in history. But if they taught like a tea class, it'd be very interesting. So then I move forward and I go and I teach English in Hong Kong after I work at that physical therapy clinic. So now I'm trying to like understand, like immerse myself in Chinese people, which I didn't have that upbringing. And just like being observant of their culture, what they eat, what they drink. And tea is just kind of like one of those things, but it isn't really talked about, like, because
Mhm.
everyone wants to be more westernized. But with that, that's where I found out where my father was from. He was from a tea growing region originally in China.
Mhm.
And he doesn't talk about that because they had to flee during the Japanese invasion. So I was like, whoa, there's like these deep stories like tied with tea, only because I'm kind of investigating into what tea really is. And I realized that was the same thing that people, like my patients, were giving to me. Their stories about who they were, who they are, how they became who they are, the people who've influenced their lives. And I was like, wow, if tea is so transformative in connecting us in this deeper relationship, then I've got to do something about this. Fast forward, then I'm a high school teacher. The school asks me to design a whole semester curriculum on tea education. I'm like, okay, I guess I'll figure this out. And then I had my students build a website all on tea education so it would show what they had learned. And and then after that, then I started my tea company as like a side hustle. But it was
Mhm.
not supposed to be a product-based company. It was purely off of like I teach people about tea. And then soon people wanted the products. And then fast forward to now, I've won all these awards. I've written a book. I have a tea farm, the first ever tea farm in Alaska, and the only geothermal powered tea farm in the world. And all that stuff is more recent versus the very beginning where I didn't even know what I was doing. And also I didn't tell you, my father lost his business because of a bad part, or I guess you could say corrupt partnership, where his business partner embezzled all the tax money. So my father lost his dream business. And so when I started my company, my parents were not happy at all because they always taught us to never, ever own a business because of what happened to my father. So I
Mhm.
had no support and no guidance when I started my company.
Wow. I feel like there's a lot to unpack here. I such an interesting story, and I love that you just sort of notice those little like nuances when you were walking around with tea, and it's like also funny people's assumptions. Like, "Oh, do you drink tea because you're Chinese?"
Yeah, that's like the first chapter of my book. It's kind of
Oh
funny.
god. Yeah, but yeah, I love that you kind of made those little like, oh, like the light bulb moments that go off in our head that lead to like eventually starting a business, which we, many of us have had when we started our own businesses. But yeah, I love that you kind of noticed like when you were walking around with tea, people would tell stories. And I think that's such a cool thing. And I guess I'm not surprised that you kind of noticed that. And then it led to the actual company. When you first decided to, you said your students, I think, did the website for you. Like was it like an actual business? Like when did you actually start selling tea, or were you selling tea back then, or like what were you doing? Because I know you were doing like education stuff, but when did it become like, oh wow, I'm actually selling tea?
So our private high school actually owned a company, owned a business, and it
Mm-hmm.
helped fund parts of the school's expenses. So they owned a printing company and they would print classified ads and different things like that. And I thought it'd be really fun to go on spring break with my tea students and actually see a real tea house or tea room. First of all, I didn't really know what one looked like. I'd never been to one before. So
Mm-hmm.
I was like, oh, let's do this thing. So I got the parents' approval, but we had to fundraise for it. So taking the school's business license, we went and bought tea and then we packaged them into gift baskets and we did holiday Christmas bazaars. One of the parents was like, oh, we should do gift baskets. I'm really good at that. I'm like, great, because I don't know how to make a single gift basket. Like, I am not color coordinating or anything like that. And so we did all these different Christmas bazaars and fundraised a bunch of money. So that was my first taste of selling tea, like buying tea and selling tea was
Mm-hmm.
for the school. But I mean, I didn't really think I was going to continue doing that. So when I started teaching the tea class, I was like, well, why don't I just buy a business license? Everyone keeps telling me since the physical therapy clinic, I should start a tea business. I don't even know what that means, but let me make sure I'm the first to do that. And we were talking about this earlier about SEO and how important it is to like start that right away. And so I was like, well, then at least I can claim I was the first tea business, even if it fizzles out. You know, like who cares if it doesn't actually last? I don't even
Mm-hmm.
know if it's going to go anywhere. So I just went to an accounting class with our the parent of the school, and she handled all the books. So we both went together to an accounting class
Mm-hmm.
taught by a CPA. And the lady was like, okay, this is my very last class. So I'm going to give you all the behind secrets and no fluff and everything of what you need to start a business and all the forms of types of businesses, S corporation, LLC, how to choose it and everything like that. Ask me anything. I don't care. It's my last day. And I was like,
Wow.
okay. And she's like, you can do it. And most of the time, people spend hundreds of dollars having somebody else do this for you. Well, it's actually really easy and will only take 10 minutes of your time. So I took all the notes down. I was like, oh, well, she said I could do it. And then I did it in 10 minutes on the computer at home. I just
Hmm.
followed her instructions, got it, you know, my tax ID number, my state business license, everything. And I was like, okay, let's see if it goes anywhere. Because she defined the difference of a hobby and a business. But all businesses start from like the hobby phase. It has to do with documentation. So I was like, okay, well, let's just start documenting this and I won't have to pay any taxes if I don't make any money because it's a hobby, right? The IRS doesn't want to go after people who don't have a serious business. So I'm like, well,
Yeah.
what's it going to hurt? So I just kind of started off with what's it going to hurt? And I started teaching tea classes in people's homes. I taught a tea class for the university here for their culinary um, departments. And more people wanted me to teach tea classes. And when I would go to people's homes, kind of like Mary Kay or Pampered Chef, like those direct sales things, but I
Mm-hmm.
did not want to sell products. And nor did I want to have like other people I had to be in charge of and all that stuff. So I started off with like, I'm only going to people's houses to teach them about tea. And then people like, so where do I get this tea? And I'm like, oh man, I have to make a catalog and sell this stuff. Okay, well, so then I just kind of built like a one sheet thing, you know, of and just packaged the tea and sold it directly. And but they got to a point where I could only haul so much like china and glass teapots and everything to people's houses in my truck. I'm like, man, something's gonna break. Like, I need help. I need people helping me to haul this stuff. It'd be nice if I had a one location that people could come to me so I didn't have to keep hauling this stuff. So I tried out a
Mm-hmm.
seasonal, you probably went there or heard of it, Pioneer Park in
Oh
Fairbanks,
yeah.
where
Yep.
yeah,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
my very first shop was in Pioneer Park.
Oh,
And so
okay.
my friend was a baker. And so I sold his cheesecakes, his scones, his cookies. And then we just made hot tea with it and then had some merchandise on the shelves and tried it out for the summer. I hired two of my high school students and we made net profit of $90 that summer when everybody at the park was like, don't worry, it's your first year. You won't make any money. You lose money, but just come back and try again. Because, it takes time. And I'm like, how in the world does this year after year, this much work to just lose money? So
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm trying it for 1 year. So I tried it for 1 year and I was like, wow, I guess that's good since everyone says you don't make money your first year. I made $90. So I just thought it was kind of funny. And then I
That's cute.
realized the majority of the people who came to my shop, I couldn't reel in the tourists. Like it's kind of this touristy park,
Yeah.
but only local people would come into my shop. And then I realized I must have a foundation for this business to be actually like a brick and mortar location because the only customers I can really get to buy from me are locals. And they were asking me, like, well, where are you going to be this winter? Obviously, not in the shop. There's no heat in here. Like, the whole park shuts down in the wintertime. So
Mhm.
I was like, oh, I don't know. So I thought about it. And then I opened up a tea house, but I didn't know if I had enough pull for my merchandise, like for tea, loose leaf tea, teapots, and things like that. But
Mhm.
food always attracts people. And my parents, I grew up in the restaurant industry, right? Which didn't make them happy either that I was serving food. But I'm like, I'm not a restaurant mom and dad. I'm a tea house. It's just like a couple steam buns and some cakes and. So just kind of try to ease my Asian parents into like accepting that I wasn't going to listen to them. Um, so yeah, I started a store and it kind of grew from there.
Interesting. Yeah, I like how you just, I just launched a store and it started from that. I love it. You make it sound so easy. Um,
No, it's not.
no, I know. Where did you, because I don't know if I missed this part. Where did you get your first tea? So you said you started selling it at like when people you go to people's houses and they ask for the tea and then you're like, crap, I have to get tea. And then I think you said you started selling it. Where did you get the tea from? Were you
So I
making it
started
or?
online. No, I just went online. I was just reselling other people's tea, like
Okay,
just buying
gotcha.
wholesale and packaging it.
Gotcha.
And that's the same thing with like the fundraiser for the school was we had a business license. So I just like looked online, like, where do you buy tea? I mean, this was in 2007, like the
Mm.
internet was out and about, but
Yeah.
still not that many places were selling tea online. So now there's like hundreds of thousands of tea companies online.
Yeah.
But so I just bought some tea and I was like, okay, let's try it. I mean, because I had to buy tea anyways for the students because I didn't really drink loose leaf tea. I was just drinking whatever was like at the coffee shops or the grocery store.
Hmm.
So I myself was learning about the tea industry as I was going about. But by the time I started my tea company, I already had visited tea farms in China. And I flew to the province where my father was born
Hmm.
by myself without my parents. And I had a a translator because I'm Cantonese, so I speak a different dialect than mainland China.
Hmm.
And he took me around to all these different tea farms. Um, and he was just a business consultant, like bridging people with Chinese cultural exchanges in some ways. So he didn't know anything about tea either. He was like, well, I'm just going to try to find you the best places that I can figure out. And so it was just like a learning journey of learning how to like buy and sell like internationally or negotiations and things like that. But yeah, I didn't know most people didn't go to a tea farm right away when they started their tea businesses. I just thought that was what you're supposed to do.
I love it. Okay, so you opened up the store, you started selling tea. When did you do the e-commerce side of things? Like when did you build your own? I mean, I know you had the website, but when did you start selling online and like what were you doing to drive traffic? Because I know that's the probably number one of two questions I get asked 700 times per day. How do I drive traffic? How do I get
Yeah,
people
so
to find me? So what did you do? Like what were some of the early things that you did to kind of get people to discover you?
so remember, this is before like Facebook has blown up and Facebook ads or anything like this. There's no Instagram, right? There's
Hmm.
Twitter, but almost nobody used Twitter. I use Twitter. Um, but I didn't use it for my business. So I started my tea company in 2007 when I was teaching the class. We were
Mhm.
building the website. I know nothing about SEO, like nothing until like years later, maybe 10 years later, I hear this word SEO. I don't know what that means. And then I'm teaching the T classes. And when I'm teaching the T classes, people are inviting their friends and family, and some of them are outside visitors. And they're like, how do I get this tea again? And I'm like, oh, well, I have my website. I guess I build the coding for a PayPal buy button. So that's what I'm doing. I'm
Oh my
literally like
God.
code. And I was pretty good like at computers and stuff when I was even in high school. So I'm like, okay, I'm just building this HTML code. Not everyone is like that. I'm just letting you know. Probably most of you have no idea what I'm talking about. So I go and I find the code and I build it in. And so in the end, it checks out on PayPal because that's the only way that I knew how to take money was through
Mhm.
PayPal. And so I just built in all these buttons for the different things that I would be teaching the T class. So then I had this paper one-line sheet of what you could buy, and it was the same stuff that I built onto the website. There's no inventory control or anything like that, right? But granted, this is very new and not that many people know about me, but then they can refer their friends and family to it. And with SEO, it just starts getting its own traction because this is in 2007. And I'm not making tons of money online, by the way. It's just bare bone minimum just to have something up there. I'm mostly selling in person and at
Mhm.
pop-up events. So by the time 2020 rolls around and everyone's going online, I've got, you know, my stuff that's been on the web forever by then.
Okay. And so people, so you indirectly leverage SEO, of course, which is amazing. SEO is like one of my favorite things to talk about because I think if you're trying to build a business beyond social media and all that, like getting the search engine to push stuff out to people when they're searching for it is ridiculously important. So I love that you kind of had that going for you. When so now you're sort of talking about 2020. Like what was the in between 2007 and then like 2020-ish COVID years? How was your business growing? Like, because I know it takes a lot to go from $10,000 to $100,000 to $500,000 to millions in revenue. Like what was the catalyst that kind of took you to that seven-figure mark? Yeah, as much as
Yeah,
you can.
so that is like a very long journey because I didn't know what I was doing and I didn't have help from my parents.
Yep.
So restaurant, it's even smaller margins.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm just doing pop-up events. I'm selling at the farmers market my food. I'm referring people back. I teach tea classes still at the university, at high schools, in people's homes. I'm doing all that at the same time, building my brick and mortar location because I'm also in Fairbanks, Alaska, which is a tiny population. I mean, not 5,000 people, but still. But I'm in a basement location. Like I'm not easy to find because I don't have that much money to start my business. So I
Mm-hmm.
was a substitute. So I quit being a high school teacher and I was a substitute teacher. So that way I could run my business. And if I had my staff there, then I'd go and substitute teach for my normal income, but I'd put all of my income right back into my business because I didn't have a bank loan. I didn't have like any sort of financing. I was literally going paycheck to paycheck, just putting
Mm-hmm.
everything back into the company, growing it that way. And referrals of people finding me out about me, ordering online. And since Fairbanks is such a touristy place, when people say, where can I get your stuff? You just hand them a business card. There's my website. You can order online, right? So
Mm-hmm.
we're just building it organically, really. I don't have like even an email newsletter maybe until like 5 years into the business where I'm like, okay, I'm supposed to have a constant contact. I guess I'll be good to tell people when the next tea class is. And
Mm-hmm.
in the meantime, though, my venue, my tea house is really big. Like we're getting like concerts in there, like people are performing. And so people
Wow.
say, oh, I found this space. It's this tea house. It'd be perfect. Have some tea, watch this musician play. And so people knew of my location, even though we're in a basement and kind of hidden, as like a venue. You could have private parties there and things like that. It had enough space for that.
Mm-hmm.
And so then moving into right before COVID, I'm still, have these buttons. I think I switched now to like vend e-commerce, which is no longer doing commerce anymore because I realized I needed to have inventory control. So when something sold out, I wouldn't be in
Mm-hmm.
trouble and have to refund them anymore. And I'm just like
Mm-hmm.
manually guesstimating what shipping costs are. So I don't have free shipping at all. Like if you want to buy it from me, you're paying for shipping. So I don't know about those skills or anything like that. But at the same time, because we won so many awards for our teas at
Mm-hmm.
the North American Tea Championships, at the Global Tea Championships. We won first place at the World Tea Expo for the Top Tea Infusionist competition. People like, who the heck is Sipping Streams? So it's driving traffic back to our
Mm-hmm.
website. And then I was featured in Fresh Cup magazine also. And then the story about our 1,000 Mile tea, which is the official tea of the Yukon Quest dog sled race, which was a donation, a one-time race donation that just blew up, was featured on NPR. So we're getting like more and more traction to this tiny little website that's mostly tea education. And we're really just building it organically. Because I don't really know about all that stuff other than I'm like, okay, if this works, great. We'll just keep doing this thing that works. I know nothing about paid ads. So I don't even know how to do it. So we'll just keep doing what we're doing. And then people started coming to us asking for wholesale. And that happened maybe 2 or 3 years, like when I started winning awards and stuff like that. So
Mm-hmm.
wholesale was great because that distribution got us out to a lot of places and then cut, because 2007 cut like 10 years into it. Then I get a huge distributor and my stuff sold at Walmart, Target, Fred Meyer's, like all these grocery stores and
Mm-hmm.
in hotels, on cruise ships, things like that. So it's just spreading more organically. And then always on your packaging, your website, you want to put it on there. Um, and I was like, we should have a loyalty program, where people can get points. And when they come in, people asked for a loyalty program. I didn't know much about that. And I just was like, okay, just give what you know, your raving fans want, right? They're the ones who are supporting you. They're always giving you money. So I'm like, okay, they want a loyalty program or a punch card system. Let's do that. And
Mm-hmm.
then now passed into 2020, our loyalty program system changed where we would get their phone numbers, but they'd opt in also with their emails and with their birthday and everything like that. So it's just naturally going into all of these things that nobody necessarily taught me about. Strategy about wholesale, that I had to be taught about, like pricing structure, how to fulfill things, lead times. I didn't even know how to like pick up a phone and call people and ask if they wanted to buy wholesale, but I
Mm-hmm.
just tried it as I went. And I did have a business coach who was not only in the product based space, but she's like, you need to literally just start getting wholesale customers because it's going to explode your network. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what happened. And then I got the distributor and I was like, holy crap. It's like things like taken off. And now we're working on a lot of refinement. 2023 for us this year is on refinement because it's kind of getting out of control when you get into like the millions and you don't have all your systems in place, especially as a manufacturer.
Can you talk about the distributor? Because I feel like you mentioned like, oh, we got a distributor and then we were featured, then we were sold in Target, Fred Meyer, and all these other places. And my mind is like, oh my gosh, that's a big thing. And for people listening, they're like, oh my God, well, how do I get my stuff sold? Can you just quickly, could you quickly talk about the distributor thing? Like, how did that happen? And like, how did you end up getting this distributor? Like, did you have to apply? And, like I told you before, wholesale is not my area of expertise. I am like direct to consumer queen. I can teach you how to sell the shit out of your stuff on a website, but wholesale is not my thing. So I don't talk about wholesale on this podcast ever. So I think people will be happy to hear a little treat from someone who has done so well. But yeah, I'm just curious, like, how did you get a distributor like that? And is it a specific type of distributor that is connected to like all these major retailers like Target and Fred Meyer?
Yeah. So when I started, in the very beginning of my business, when I got more and more people coming into my store, and they're like, do you
Mm-hmm.
sell wholesale? I already had like Safeway, the regional buyer, come into my store and they're like, I've heard so much good stuff about you. We'd be interested.
Wow.
And I was like, I'm not ready. Like, I think I was in like third or fourth year. I'm like, I can
Wow.
find all the Safeways.
That's
And he's like, no,
crazy
it's
though. That's
not.
crazy. Safe, like
So I
safe.
didn't,
Is
yeah.
Safeway a Pacific Northwest food store? Because I don't, so I live in
Yeah.
Seattle, but I don't actually think I knew about it until I moved to the West to Seattle, Washington. So I don't know if people
Yeah.
know.
They're more of the West or Northwest, and
Okay.
Albertsons, I think, has bought them. Um,
Oh, I didn't know that. So Safeway
yeah.
is like a major grocery store. If you're listening and you're like, what the hell is Safeway? It's like the main grocery store in at least where I live in Washington, as is Fred Meyer. So these are like two of the grocery stores that you go to every friggin' day to buy all of your groceries. So this is like a huge deal. Okay, keep going. I love it.
Yeah. So I'm like, okay, I'm not ready. I'm like, I need to get ready. What does that mean? Okay, pricing. Do I have enough inventory? Like, when are they going to want this? And then it was just like, well,
Mhm.
just call me. And they were going through restructuring because they're being bought by Albertsons, or like, I mean, it was several years before that had happened, but
Mhm.
they were restructuring things themselves. So thank goodness that didn't happen right away, because I don't think I could have handled that. And then I was like, wow, all these people are interested in me wholesale. And
Mhm.
someone said, I should go to Seattle, because in Fairbanks and Alaska, I would go to coffee shops all the time trying to get them to carry my teas, and they don't want to do it. Granted, it was loose leaf tea. They don't want the fuss of loose leaf tea, and all I sell is loose leaf tea at this point. And I
Mhm.
sell filters and stuff like that, and they just don't want it. That's fine. So I went to Seattle because Seattle has a larger population. Then you've got Oregon, who is like Portland. They have lots of tea drinkers there.
Mhm.
So I actually started selling at wholesale shows in Seattle twice a
Mhm.
year for 3 years, until people in Alaska started wanting my stuff. Like, I think I was ahead of my time in Alaska, and it
Mhm.
just wasn't ready yet. So I was like, fine, you don't want to buy my stuff? I'm going to go somewhere where I can just get wholesale. Like, so I mostly sold wholesale outside of the state of Alaska in the beginning, which was really
Mhm.
funny because I'm like, my own state doesn't support me at that time. But then when it started transitioning, I didn't, and the Seattle wholesale gift show was dying at the time. I'm like, I'm not spending $3,000 every time to go to Seattle. I'm gonna just stick with the Alaska wholesale show, which there is a wholesale show in Alaska for all the tourist companies. So
Mhm.
that's when you're gonna have Holland America, Princess, and all those companies. But what's really important to know about those large, like super corporations, you might call it, because they're like several cruise companies all in one, is they don't want to buy from a million small buyers. So
Mhm.
I had heard from different people at the show, like, you need to work with a distributor. There's 3 distributors here. And I was like, oh, okay. Like, what does that? So I just asked questions, really. And they're like, oh,
Mhm.
and then this buyer, you want to sell to them. Like, that one store, that one company. That's why I was asking if you'd been to Hoona, Alaska, Icy Straight Point. We
Mhm.
sell to Hoona, Alaska, and everyone wants to talk to that buyer because you're going to have a very large sale. And I was like, okay, but I'm not going to like try to hound them, right? And I was taught also year after year going to the Alaska Wholesale Show, like, people want to know that you're going to be consistently there every year. Otherwise, they don't know if you're going to be there for them in the long run. I'm like, okay,
Mhm.
it's like a relationship. You have to show consistency. And my first year doing the Alaska Wholesale Show, cutting back to like the early years of my business, I made 6 sales. And I asked my booth neighbors on both sides, I'm like, I only have 6 sales because I'm used to direct to consumer, right?
Mhm.
I'm like, and they're like, 6 sales, that's a lot. And I'm like, oh, you guys kind of sound like Pioneer Park, like, like, you're not gonna make that many sales. I'm like, well, then why am I here? So I was hustling, acting like I was giving out samples like I normally do in a direct to consumer thing. And
Mhm.
people are like, you need to slow down. This isn't a direct to consumer thing. But then I never saw anybody else get on the floor, talk to people, say hi to every single person. So I was just hustling, I was used to. And
Yeah.
so when you have that mentality of direct to consumer, have that same type of mindset. Like, you are here to make your stuff the star against all the other competition, right?
Mhm.
So if you want to stick out and make sure you're on the floor, not looking at your phone, not looking down, it's not
Mhm.
boring, because you never know when you're going to close someone. So the year that I got the distributor, my coach was like, you need to really push on wholesale. And I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know. And I happened to be across the way from a distributor. My booth was right across from them. And I noticed this year they're focused on Alaskan food products because a lot of these distributors sell like, keychains, postcards, souvenir stuff you'll find in the cruise ships and the hotels. I'm like, I'm not any of those things. I don't fit. So when I saw the distributor have a whole shelf that was focused on Alaskan food products, I was so scared. I knew I had a product that was not sold in the grocery stores. It used to be sold in the grocery stores by my competitor. Their stuff got pulled for some legal reason. And so I was like, hey, it's my chance to sell honey. Did you hear me? I just said honey, not tea. So I was like, okay, I can get into the grocery stores by selling this honey because I know there's a hole in the market in the souvenir section for Alaskan honey. So I walked up to them, and first of all, they were drinking my tea samples and everything. They love the tea. And so I pitched them about the honey. The next day, the president of the distributor company is like, oh, yeah, I've heard like you're interested in selling us your honey. I think there's a great place for it. Nobody else sells honey in all of our different locations. That were all of those places: Target, Fred Meyer's, Walmart, Safeway, cruise ships, hotels. They were the distributor. They're the largest souvenir distributor in Alaska. And I was like, okay, so you want the honey? And he's like, yeah, but everyone's talking about your tea. Why don't we get your tea in? And I was like, oh, okay. Like, but I was just so scared, like my product wouldn't, have demand for it. And so with that distributor company, they had an interior product design department. So they actually helped me redesign my packaging and what worked with them, which you're not going to find in a normal distributor company. I'm just letting you know. They actually designed their own products too, that they had made overseas, like jackets and backpacks and stuff. So they actually helped me get my stuff into stores to be sold consistently.
Wow.
But it was a partnership and they had to take a percentage. But in the end, they also worked with me with pricing. So I didn't go out of business. Because I remember the lead buyer, she said, if you don't make a profit, then you will not be able to sell to us next year. You will be out of business. So let's work on your pricing. So she was coaching me so I could sell my stuff to a distributor.
I love that. That's so fun. And then how did your business change after, you worked with a distributor and you were in all these shops? Like, were you sold in all those shops, or how did that work?
Yeah. So they buy all the product, keep it in their warehouse, and then they distribute it to all those places. So they sell to them. And so I had a contract where I couldn't compete against them, which was fine because all I had to do was focus on making all of my stuff that they ordered, thousands of dollars a month, and then just ship it straight to their warehouse. And they did all the legwork. I didn't have to fulfill invoices and chase down money for all these other people. So it's a relationship of what you want. And if it's a healthy relationship and it's a win-win for both sides, then it cuts down on a lot of time. So even though they took 25%, they were stocking the shelves. They were getting it to, the stores. I just had to do one thing, which was fulfill their order, and they took care of the rest.
And I know that you said thousands per month. Were they ordering like a ton of product, or was it like a manageable amount?
Oh, it was a ton of product. Like at first I couldn't make it all. And so I just told them, I just communicated with them, like, I don't even have enough money right now to buy the honey. So the honey is from my friend's beekeeping company, and we package all the honey. But I said, I can't fulfill the order. I don't have enough money to have this much honey on hand. I've never sold $5,000 worth of honey in 1 month before. At a distributor price. So you can imagine the volume's even bigger.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, that's fine. Can we just write you a check now so you can get the honey? And I was like,
wow.
What? That's why I'm saying, like, my situation was literally like a blessing, a miracle, because you're not going to hear that normally.
Yeah.
And so I was like, you're going to what? They're like, do you need 15,000? How much do you need? We'll write you a check right now so you can get the product. Like,
wow.
Okay. So it was like they were
Amazing.
prepaying for the product. They're like, oh,
Yeah.
we can get it, right? And how long do we need? Like a month? How long do you need? Just tell us the lead time so we can communicate it with our customers because they want this product. And
Hmm.
so when you just have this healthy communication,
Yeah.
because I was scared like the whole time, like, oh my gosh, they're going to drop us. We can't fulfill this or
Mm.
whatever. They're like, all you have to do is talk to us. And we understand you're a small business, like really small. There's only five of you in your whole company.
Yeah.
Um, let's just tell us what's reasonable so we don't overpromise and and then we'll get through this. And I was like,
Wow.
oh, that's amazing.
Yeah. That's really, really, that's very ideal, isn't it? I know I have a few like my product-based business was in the pet space, and I remember one of my business friends was trying to work out a deal with Costco to sell her handmade not freeze dried, handmade like dried liver or something. I don't know, some yucky dog treats. And they wanted to buy like, if you want us, if you want this to work out, like we have to buy enough that will fit in like the truck or something of a Costco truck.
Mhm.
And she basically like she didn't have the funds to like fulfill the first order, and like the deal never happened. And I know she was really like devastated over that, because I think when you think of your brand and the idea of it being sold in like a Costco, that's very exciting for someone. But she was a one person team. She literally made her dog treats in her house and had like a meat drying, or I don't even know what it's called, like a drying machine. And she would put the
Uh-huh.
little liver, or not liver, lamb in the machine. And she was like, I can't possibly make this for a Costco. So anyway, just your story reminded me of that. And she did not have the success story. And I know that she was like really her business, like she had a business where like every single thing she tried, like nothing would work ever. Um, so she ended up closing her business. But yeah, it's sad when that kind of stuff happens.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, I love your story so much. I feel like I have like a million questions. I would love to hear just like because honestly, when you're talking, do you want to know what I hear from you is it wasn't just one thing. It wasn't one thing that you did that like led your business to success. You have an in-person store. You're an educator. You teach people. You sell tea online. Like you've done like a million things to kind of grow your brand, and you do wholesale. What I hear from a lot of people like in my programs or just people in general is like, I tried something once and it didn't work, so my business is a failure. Or like, I launched my online store and I made 6 TikTok videos and my business isn't working. Like people just only try one thing. And then when it doesn't work after like a month, they think like their business is a failure, and it's not. It's just like you haven't tried enough things and you haven't been consistent enough. So I feel like when I'm listening to you talk, like the biggest thing that's coming from like the biggest takeaway for me is like you have tried, like you're a hustler, and I love that. But like you've also tried everything. Like you've legit had brick and mortar, educator, online sales, wholesale, manufacturing. Like you've literally done everything, and it's worked for you. And I think that's it's an easy thing to overlook, because most people don't try even 2 of the things, where like they're hustling at a trade show and chatting with people and not like staring at their phone with their head down. Cause I know exactly what you're talking about. I've been to a couple trade shows, and that's exactly what people do. They just like look at their phone, or even like you go to farmers markets and you walk around the farmers
Well,
markets and people are just sitting there with their face down. And I'm like, why are you even at a farmers market? Like, no one
mhm.
is going to come over and talk to you if your head is down in your phone, versus the person who's like, hey, come over here and try my hot sauce. Like I have pickle samples. And like those are the people that I always go to, because they're friendly. They're making
Yeah.
eye contact with you. And I feel like it's the same thing with a business. Is like you can't just try one thing and then if it doesn't work after a month or two, you give up. But yeah, I would love to just hear from you. What do you think, if you could give anyone just one piece of advice. I know you've done a lot of things and I love that so much. I think you have such a cool story. What would your advice be to someone who's maybe starting out in their business and they're just like not really sure what to do to get their business to the next level? Like, what kind of advice would you give them?
Well, first of all, it's like, what does it mean to get to the next level? That's different for everyone. So
Yeah.
me growing up in my Asian family, I was like the black sheep of the family, and I was always made fun of, and I wasn't perfect enough. And my sister was the superstar, my younger sister, and she's
Mhm.
perfect at everything, had perfect grades, amazing artist, won every single art competition that she's ever entered. Even in elementary school, her art was in the Smithsonian. And so
Wow.
growing up, I know that's like, and for having like this competitive family who's always telling me like how much of a failure I am or this or that. And granted,
Oh,
I love my parents. No, they like live with me, so like I love my parents. I will take care of them forever if I have to. But at the same time, that type of like, so my upbringing was very much a lot of PBS. And I just remember Mr. Rogers always saying, I love you just the way you are. And
mhm.
anytime I felt bad, I'd say, Mr. Roger tells me he loves me just the way I am. I must be okay. Like I would just hold on to the simple truth. So instead of trying to up level or get to the next level, I would
Mhm.
just try everything. And then I lean into what I get a positive response from.
Mhm.
Like, because you're missing out when you're looking at all the negative that's around you, like, oh, that person didn't want my sample. You're not going to smile for the next person who does want your sample. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
you're closing the door by looking at the loudest negative feedback. And
Mhm.
sometimes it's really hard, especially when I read my Google reviews and I'm like, oh, I got a 1-star rating. Who screwed it up today? You know? And I'm like, okay, what's the learning from this? Okay. This is one complaint out of 3,000 reviews. Okay.
Mhm.
So it's not that bad. And I made somebody else's day. Like, why am I here in a service based industry? Service based, as in, I serve people with my products, with my education, with my food. I'm
Mhm.
here to serve. And so, if I focus on the good that I'm doing in the world, I'm willing to try anything because I know from the positive feedback how much I have changed people's lives. So don't focus on the up leveling. That's what's given me the strength to try everything and anything
Mhm.
because you're closing off, the opportunity of something great. You just don't know yet. You haven't gotten there yet. And I've been in business, remember, 16 years now. I've
Mhm.
been through almost bankruptcy, been through CPA fraud, I've been through burglary, theft, employee embezzlement,
Oh,
and
geez.
most people don't even know that. I
Mhm.
went through all of that stuff. I went through an employee a couple of years ago who tried to sabotage my whole entire company and almost made everyone quit.
Oh.
And while they were working for another company. And so they would come in and they would like get them to quit. And so I'm like, okay, yeah, granted, I talked to my lawyer and I could have sued him, but I was like, whatever. What's the point? Let's focus on the good. Let's focus on the good qualities of our employees, our team members. Let's
Mhm.
lean into what people want. What are people asking for? Now, granted, a lot of people are going to tell you their opinions, a lot of people. But who's going to give you the most money for their opinion, right? Like if you see somebody coming in day after day and they keep buying from you and they keep buying from you and they're a raving fan and they said, have you tried this before? But their money supports their idea, right? Because they're
Mhm.
a raving fan. They have validity because they already buy from you all the time.
Yep.
Why not try it for a little bit and you can always cancel it? You can always decide that was a failure, try a different product, you
Yeah.
know? But you got to lean into the good. That's what it is. Lean into the good. And you can up level in so many different ways, up level, side level, whatever it is going to be.
Yeah. I love that. That's amazing. And I totally agree with you. I think for so many people, like they've launched an Etsy store or they launch, their Shopify store and they just don't get sales. They don't get that traction. They don't get any traction. And where I always tell people is like, yeah, you have to try different things. Like if you're only posting on social media, what about SEO? What about email marketing? What about customer loyalty programs? Like there's so many things that you can do, but I think people get really stuck on the like, oh, well, it didn't work for me. And Susan's brand is killing it on TikTok. And like, why isn't it working for me? Um, wanted to ask you one more question, but it slipped my mind when you were talking. What's the next for your business? Like, and I feel like this is like a cheesy question. Like, what do you see for your business in the next few years? Also, and maybe this is a personal question, so if it is, just let me know. Are you ever thinking of like exiting the business?
So, my husband came on board with my company a couple years ago. It was a couple of years ago. Man, I'm losing COVID years, get all confused. And so he quit his very nice, comfy government job for me. But
Hmm.
that was the only way we could be together because he worked in another town. And so, and I wasn't going to give up my company because I love the way I positively affect my community, whether it's
Mhm.
here locally or virtually online. Just hearing the stories and the testimonials and the feedback it just fuels me. So what we're doing in the net, and that's why I said this year is our year of refinement, is like
Mhm.
refining all of our SOPs for our manufacturing, for our food service, for our everything to make it super efficient and replicable.
Mhm.
And so the next way that we can see our company jump into like multi-millions is by franchising. That's one of the things we're working on is franchising our business because we created an internal training program for our staff to be onboarded very quickly with T education. And then now we've changed that and up leveled it and monetized it for our T certification program. That's our education component because we already use it on in-house. And so we can use that for other people in their tea businesses, or if they just love tea and they want to know more about tea and they want to be a certified tea specialist, we created that program out of a need inside of our company. So we could
Mhm.
answer all the questions because people come to me because I was an educator and I specialize in tea education. Now I have to replicate myself into my staff, into my team. So we did that. Then we created an internal metric system to refine bonusing our staff in how efficient they are, whether they're on the floor selling, whether they're making tea cookies, whether they're packing online orders. Everything has a metrics. So we're creating an internal
Mhm.
metric system that we've used for several years already. It took me years to design that, just letting you know, on
Mhm.
pieces of paper, which drives my husband nuts because he's like an IT efficiency person. So
Mhm.
but it was after years of calculating how like what the average efficiency should be for the standard of staff. And so we have that. So that way, if someone wants to buy a Sipping Streams franchise, they can easily give feedback to their staff on how well they're doing and to coach them and guide them to be more successful. And to again replicate our mission of our company, which is to help people grow to know who they are through the medium of tea. So it
Mhm.
always comes back to like my
That.
initial experience of drinking tea, holding a cup of Lipton tea, and someone tells me their story, that connection that we have. And that's all to advance our mission, which is the only way I can get it out there faster because I'm only one person. So our next few years is working on franchising and getting that
Mhm.
going. Our next biggest thing is we're getting a whole system reboot of our manufacturing because we're trying to get on QVC. We've already been like approached by them. So some of our
Wow.
products, we're working on that this year.
Mhm.
And that's a whole like logistics of manufacturing in the food industry part. So hopefully that answered the first question. And then the second one is like, do I
Mhm.
see myself exiting? I do see myself eventually exiting one day. I'm not going to necessarily pass it on to my future children if they don't want it. I very
Mhm.
much, from my own personality, is you should do whatever you want to do and whatever you feel called to do. But the franchising part will allow somebody else to be able to take over if I want to exit, right? But I will always have this passion of connecting with people and who I
Mhm.
am. So I want to prepare myself to one day exit, but I don't have to take that option if I don't want to.
Right. Amazing. I love it. Well, thank you so much. I love your story. And it was really nice just hearing all the really fun things that you've been able to build up and just create this amazing company with a really strong mission. And I love that too, because I think so many brands like gloss over the mission part where like there should be something more than just the product. So tell everyone where they can find you, where they can find your tea, of course, and how they can follow you or connect with you online.
Yeah, so you can go on our website to sippingstreams.com. And through there, there's links to our YouTube channel, which is really easy. It's youtube.com/@sippingstreams. If you want to watch any of our tea education videos, that we have like over 300 videos on tea education. I also have a tea podcast called the Essence of Tea podcast, and it's named after my book, The Essence of Tea, which you can get on Amazon and Kindle. But yeah, just you could pretty much find us anywhere with the handle @sippingstreams.
Love it. Well, thank you so much, Jenny. So nice to have you on the podcast. I appreciate it.
Thank you.